Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak about the grave threat that the administrative state poses to our country and what we can do to stop it. And I want to thank the senator from Oklahoma for sort of leading the effort here today to talk about this and air this out on the Senate floor. Quite frankly, one of my big surprises, I think, in my first 2 years here in the United States Senate is how little we actually talk about this and how little time we've spent addressing this. So many of the conversations that happen inside the Beltway here are so detached from the conversations that I have back home in Missouri. Quite frankly, the people that I talk to who work hard every day can't believe the waste that happens here. They can't believe we spend millions of dollars on drag shows and DEI trainings in countries halfway around the world. And if they knew more about it, my guess is it would be even a bigger topic of conversation. There'd be more outrage, and I think that's part of what the table setting is going to be over the next 6 months or so here, which is to identify these things, talk about it, highlight them, and do something about it. Last year, when I gave my inaugural speech on this Senate floor, I talked about how the administrative state was one of the biggest threats to our republic. Nameless, faceless bureaucrats who are accountable to nobody, promulgating rules and regulations that deeply impact everyday Americans every day. The EPA can promulgate a rule that devastates farmers. A farm that's been in a family for generations can be underwater just like that, and they don't even know who to talk to about it. Ranchers are impacted. None of these folks are ultimately ever held accountable. You don't know their name. The title's ambiguous, and they're in an agency you've never heard of. In the Loper-Bright case that the Supreme Court just recently heard, it dealt a significant blow to the power of the administrative state. NOAA, which was attempting to force fishermen in that case to pay out of their own pocket for federal observers on their own boats. There are many, many more examples than just this particular case, but this one made it to the Supreme Court. They had an impactful decision. And real Americans have been impacted by this bloated bureaucratic mess that's developed over the decades. While the administrative state is still a grave threat to our country, the good news is President Trump will soon occupy the White House. DOJ will soon get to work, and we can finally have some real momentum to dismantle the administrative state once and for all, returning the power back to the people. See, the difference is when the senator from Oklahoma gets elected or I get elected, the folks get a say. They can send us back or they can send us home. If you want to ban gas stoves, we should have to vote on that. And my guess is it would receive very few votes. But if you've got a bureaucrat that's not even in an office anymore, because only 6% of them are actually in the office, making these kinds of decisions, you lose every sense of accountability, and our representative form of government is ultimately undermined. To ensure that President Trump and DOJ hit the ground running, yesterday I introduced 2 bills that are a critical 1-2 punch in dismantling the administrative state. The first bill is called the Eraser Act, which prohibits any agency from issuing a rule unless the same agency has repealed at least 3 rules. Additionally, the bill prohibits an agency from issuing a major rule unless the agency has repealed 3 or more rules and the cost of the new major rule is less than or equal to the cost of the rule that's being repealed. This would make agencies think twice before promulgating new regulations, and because these agencies are addicted to the power that comes from regulating Americans, it could have the added benefit of stripping many regulations from the books altogether and freeing Americans from the bonds of over-regulation. The second bill is called the Separation of Powers Restoration Act, which builds on the Supreme Court's ruling in the Loper-Bright case and tearing down of the Chevron deference that we've lived with for decades. This bill would enact a stricter standard of review. No longer can agencies expect the courts to just side with their interpretation of a statute like they could when Chevron deference was in place. This bill would institute a de novo standard of review. Under a de novo standard of review, courts will weigh the merits of the arguments without deference standard to either side. placing American citizens and businesses either caught on the wrong side of regulatory enforcement action or challenging the validity in the first place on equal footing in a court with that agency. This is a critical effort which will strip power away from the unelected bureaucrats and put the power back in the hands of Americans. I look forward to working hand in hand with the Trump administration and with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and my colleagues in the DOJ caucus to finally reform and dismantle the administrative state, shrink the size of the federal government, reinstitute fiscal sanity here in Washington, and stop these agencies from burdening American citizens with their onerous regulatory schemes. Mr. President, I yield back.